Welcome, everyone, to Special Education Legal Fund's first webinar of the 2022-2023 academic year. This webinar's topic is how to read an IEP, and we're really excited to have all of you join us after a long summer, and for our panel of experts to really dissect this topic and talk about exactly what makes a good IEP a good goal and how to read your child's IEP. My name is Christine Lai. I am the executive director and co-founder of SELF, and I am so pleased to welcome our panelists, our moderator, Lara Damashek, and all of the attendees who will be joining us this evening. So thank you. First up, I wanted to acknowledge our featured sponsor of the night, Winston Preparatory School. Winston Preparatory School is an institution that views each student as an individual, a unique learner, and who has the potential to learn. Winston students have a variety of learning differences, including dyslexia, nonverbal learning disabilities, NVLD, and executive functioning difficulties, ADHD. It is important that Winston's work is grounded in research regarding how students learn and that the learning is grounded in research. Winston has campuses in New Jersey, Connecticut, New York City, Long Island, Transitions Program, in California, and Winston Online. So thank you very much to Winston for your long time and dedicated support to our mission. I would be remiss if I didn't also thank our corporate sponsors. Aside from Winston, at the gold level, besides Winston Preparatory School, we'd like to acknowledge WealthSpire Advisors, who is new to us this year, and we're really excited to have them on board. At the silver level, American School for the Deaf, Chapel Haven Schliefer Center, Shrub Oak International School, Villa Maria School, and Fusion Academy. And at the bronze level, I'd like to acknowledge Eagle Hill School and our friends at the Windward School. Thank you to all of our sponsors and friends. Before we begin, I wanted to talk a little bit about Special Education Legal Fund for those of you who are not familiar with us. Special Education Legal Fund, or SELF, was founded in 2018 to provide grants for families in need with children in the special education system. Since our founding, we have provided over $550,000 in grants to over 200 families in over 50 school districts across Connecticut and Westchester County, New York. We are an entirely volunteer, nonprofit organization founded by parents for parents. Our mission, since really before we were founded, has been to provide families with knowledge and resources so they can better navigate and understand the special education system. We can't really do what we do without the support of people like you. As I said, we're entirely volunteer. We're a nonprofit organization. So what does that mean? That means that no one at the organization takes a salary. I don't take a salary. We have no salaried employees, and we only have volunteers. This means that nearly all of our donations go directly to support families like you. Any amount, no matter what the size, helps us to continue to support parents through our grants programs and through this free webinar series. As it is the beginning of the year, I'm going to spend a little time talking about our grants program because I've been getting some questions, online, through Facebook and, over the phone about our grants program and when we open this year. The Legal Assistance Program and the Advocacy Support Program will begin accepting applications on September 22nd. The Legal Assistance Program, as some of you may know, provides families in need with up to $5,000 in grants and legal support grants from a qualified special education attorney. The Advocacy Support Program provides families in need with up to $1,000 in advocacy support from a qualified non-attorney special education advocate. Whoops, sorry. I skipped that. We review grants on a monthly basis from October through June during the academic year. And as I said, we will begin accepting applications on September 22nd. For more information to begin that process, please visit our website at spedlegalfund.org, and I will put that into the chat in a moment. I'm just going to review the timeline of grant applications for those of you who aren't familiar, but the pre-screening via the website will start on September 22nd. That is the first step in the process. After you have completed your pre-screening, you will receive an application either in email or mail form within 72 hours of reaching out to us on the website. That application form with the completed documents is due on the 15th. That would be October 15th, but basically it's due on the 15th of every month. You must complete a phone interview by the 22nd of each month. So you have a week after your application goes in to complete your phone interview. And every family who applies to either program will be notified by the end of the month. So in October's case, it will be by the 31st. I would be remiss and not to mention that we are engaging in our annual fundraising gala on September 17th in Greenwich. This is our main fundraising event of the year. I really can't stress how important this event is to us. We cannot run the legal assistance program without this gala. So the registration link, if anyone, should feel like you want to come to the event, you want to support the event, you want to donate even a very small amount to our mission and our cause, is right here. I will also put this in the chat, but it is studio54self.givesmart.com because we're going with the disco theme this year. But I really can't emphasize enough that we cannot run the legal assistance program without this benefit. It is the single thing that generates, pretty much all of the funding that we use for that program during a given year. And finally, so we're here now. We're back to our scheduled programming. I would like to introduce our panelists for the evening. Jill Chuckas is our first up. I think, Jill, this is this your third panel with us? I'm not even sure.
It might. I know I've done two. This might be the third.
I think this might be the third. Jill has tremendous experience in advocating for children, and we are really, really excited to have her on the call. I don't know many advocates that have the breadth of experience and really just the tenacity on behalf of her clients that Jill does. So we're really excited to have Jill back for her second, third, or fourth go on our webinar series. So thanks, Jill. Next up is Dani Cohen. This is Dani's first appearance on our webinar series, and we're really excited to have her. Dani comes to us from the law offices of Robin Keller in Norwalk. Dani has joined that office recently after a storied career in special education on the public school side in Stamford and a variety of other districts where her responsibilities included a lot of things, but most particularly, as we were just discussing before, we all got on the webinar, the new Connecticut IEP. So we're really excited to have Dani and her expertise on the call. Welcome.
Thank you.
Our next up is Ann Munkenback. Ann, this might be your fifth webinar with us. I mean, I think we're getting up there. Anyway, we love Ann. Ann is a special education advocate with a tremendous breadth of experience, really in all aspects of what children struggle with in the special education system. But I think Ann has particular interest in assistive technology as well as reading issues, particularly dyslexia. And so we're really excited to have Ann on this webinar for the multiple times that she's been on. So thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
Last of our panelists, but not least, is Stacey Tié, who comes to us from the law offices of Dana Jonson. This is your first webinar with us, isn't it? Oh my gosh. I actually feel like, I feel like you've been on webinars with us before. I don't know why. I feel like everything is that you've been on with us before. So that's exciting. Whoops, I've gone back. So Stacey comes to us, as I said, as a professional non-attorney special education advocate from the law offices of Dana Jonson. Stacey is amazing with clients. She really has a way with, just a really nurturing and hand-holding way with clients that, alleviates the stress and tension that I've seen in a lot of, our clients that come to her for support. So welcome. We're really excited to have you. This is great.
Thank you.
And again, last but not least, I am going to introduce Lara Damashek, our moderator, who's like one of my favorite people in the world, board member at Special Education Legal Fund, member of our Grants Review Committee, but also a former special education attorney from the law offices of Regina Skyer, a current special education advocate, a former public school teacher, and a current, CSC or Committee on Special Education representative at the Windward School. Lara has a great depth of experience, and really, I think, is one of the just the most collaborative people that I've ever had the pleasure to work with or know. So I'm really excited to have Lara moderate this great panel for us. And this wouldn't be a webinar if we didn't have a disclaimer, which I'm going to read now. This webinar panel is presented for informational purposes only. This webinar is intended as a resource for families who are navigating the special education system, particularly in Connecticut or New York, and it is not intended to provide legal support, advice, or assistance to any particular individual, nor is it intended to replace the advice and counsel of a qualified special education attorney. This webinar should not be construed as an endorsement by Special Education Legal Fund or any of its representatives of any of the participating professionals in the panel. For webinar participants, this panel should be used as a public forum. Please do not ask questions in the Zoom platform, either in the Q&A or chat, about your child specifically or your child's legal or educational situation. Please email any questions you have to me at christine@spedlegalfund.org. I will put that in the chat as well. In your question, please refrain from comments that include identifiable information about your child, including name, grade, school, or school district. Please remember your screen name may be visible to participants in the panel, as well as the panelists and Special Education Legal Fund. Finally, the webinar is being recorded and may be distributed or shown at a later date at the discretion of Special Education Legal Fund. So, that was a lot of words, but here we are. How to read an IEP.
Okay, should I start?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think, first of all, hello, everybody. Good evening. I think it's very fitting that we are doing this panel the last day of August. I think other than taking out my son's lunchbox this morning, this moment right now, back here with you all definitely makes me feel like the summer is over, but we are at the start of a new school year, which is also always very exciting. And we're so happy to have this wonderful panel of experts to talk about this very important topic of reading IEPs, especially at the start of a new school year. So I'm going to start with a very general question, which I'm sure that many of you have thoughts on. And that's really, when reviewing my child's IEP, if I'm a parent of a child with an IEP, what are the main things I really should be looking out for with a critical eye? And who would like to start the conversation? Jill, you're the first person I see in my.
I know, and I'm always the big mouth who starts.
Okay,
so
we all.
Those of you who know me and have seen me in meetings or met me know that I'm never at a loss for words. But yeah, there's a lot of things that are super important to keep in mind right off the top. It's really important to look at present levels. It's really important to look at what are the concerns and needs, and then to go into the goals. So those are the three things I think we're going to be talking about a lot as a theme from all of us that we need to focus on when we're coming to a PPT meeting or a CSE meeting, when we're collaborating with our team members in order to determine what we need to do for the child. But we need to focus first on what are the child's present levels. What is going on with this kiddo now? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What is the impact? And we really need to noodle down and define those items, because what you will find in the old IEP and the new IEP is that those concerns and needs need to translate into something. And the something is a goal. And then that goal translates into a service. So when you're coming together for your meeting, those are the things you need to be thinking about.
So what going on that, the present levels of performance, if someone can just give us a little background on just what that is and how would I know as a parent that, the present levels of performance are accurate, or what would a good present level of performance look like for my child?
I'd love to jump in on that one if that's okay. So a present level of performance should paint a picture of what it would look like to see your child sitting in that type of classroom. So if you're talking about English language arts or math or other non-academic areas, communication, it paints a complete picture. It doesn't leave any guesswork or open to interpretation. Instead of just saying a weakness in written expression, diving down even deeper can create an introduction, but struggles to expand on sentences and include details. It should make it that whoever picks it up knows exactly where you're starting from. So there is no guessing game and having to waste time trying to reassess at the beginning of a school year where your kiddo is starting from.
And in what areas should you have present levels of performance identified?
Everything. I hate to say it, it's everything, but everything from if they are working independently or utilizing group work, how are they when it's a whole classroom discussion? Does their backpack look like the papers have been thrown up inside of it? Is their desk tidy? Everything matters.
Okay.
And that specificity is so important too, Dani. I love that you brought up the example of written expression, because I think those of us on the call, and probably most of you parents, often see a concern. It just says something very generic like that, written expression. What the heck does that mean? Does it mean the kid can't put together a sentence, or isn't putting a period at the end of it? Is it that they can't generate an idea, or that they can only generate one idea? So the specificity is so important, and that needs to be a focus, as Dani said, in all of the different areas that a child's life touches in that school setting, and sometimes outside the school setting too, folks.
And are those only the areas that the child struggles in? Or if the child, say, has an IEP because the child is dyslexic and is struggling in reading and writing and is a strong math student, do there need to be present levels of performance for math? Or are we just...
I think you're asking the question, is there a need to support the area of math, right?
Okay, so that is when there is, right.
Right. So yeah, present levels of performance, as Dani said, it would be, or I can't remember Jill or Dani, but both of you together, it's the entire child's, a view of the entire child's ability to access the education in school. So it includes every little teeny weeny aspect that we can think of, every little detail. Can the child walk into the building and know exactly where to go? Where's the classroom? How do I put my things away? Can the child attend for a long enough period of time to be able to achieve an academic project independently? But also it includes strengths. It's not just the weak areas, but the areas of strength that the team can build upon those strengths and utilize those strengths to help the child succeed in their areas of weakness. So it's important to weigh both areas and understand the whole child.
And I know Jill also mentioned that goals are an important thing to look out for. Does someone want to share, some of the things that parents, or start off on sharing some of the things we should look for as parents when determining if a goal is a well-written goal?
I'd love to
go ahead,
share.
Anne.
That's like my biggest beef with IEPs is that, and what I've taught parents that I work with or shared with them is that goals need to be skill-based. If the goal is not aligned specifically with the skill that the child could acquire, then very likely it's way too general. So think in terms of any goal, whether it's a social emotional goal or a reading goal, whatever it is, that child will learn a specific skill and develop these skills as they reach their independence in these environments.
So I think, Anne, to chime in on what you're saying, I see a lot of times, for instance, John Smith will improve his reading comprehension by mastery of the following objectives, which is great. But what's difficult is, what about his reading comprehension are we improving? Improving means you have something quantifiable to start from and to end to. What skill are we working on? So something that would be more appropriate would be by the end of an IEP period, when given a grade level nonfiction passage, John Smith will identify the main idea and provide at least 3 details from the text that relate to the main idea with 90% accuracy in 3 out of 4 consecutive trials as measured by a teacher-created rubric. There's no question as to what I want him to do by the end of that goal.
Well, and I would add to that also it should be clarified whether the child should be achieving this goal independently or with teacher prompts or with assistive technology or some other aids or services or modifications. That should be tied into that goal. So it's really clear what level of independence the child is achieving.
And one of the basic rules that we live by is SMART goals, and that stands for specific. And the questions you're looking to answer are: who's involved? What do we want to accomplish? Where will it be done? Why are we doing this goal? Which constraints and requirements do we have? The M is measurement, as Dani talked about. You want to be able to measure. You want to be able to measure it and make sure that they're making progress towards mastery. We want to make sure that it's attainable. So the question there is, is the goal reasonable enough to be accomplished? How so? And make sure the goal is not out of reach, but also not below a standard performance. And then the R is relevant. You want to make sure that it's a worthwhile goal for your student based on their present levels of performance and where they're at. And then timely, as Dani mentioned, it has to be done. In general, we write goals for an entire school year. So that's those. We live by SMART goals. If you're a parent and you're like, okay, this is a lot of information and it seems very, I'll use the word clinical. I think if you're unsure, the best thing you can do is ask your team, explain to me how this works in real time. How are you going to be doing this goal, working on this goal with my kids, so I can understand what it looks like and how you're going to implement it. That would be my best advice. Of if this feels too much and overwhelming, ask your team, how are you going to be working with my child on this specific goal?
And I know the measurable part is very important, but sometimes when a parent hears, to do something with 80% accuracy 3 out of 5 times on it, like, what is that? Is that good for the goal to say that? But what does that really mean? Will the team ask? I mean, is it better to have something like 80% accuracy in a goal, or?
Yeah,
I
was actually going to ask, I was going to comment on that piece of it, because one of the things I find very frustrating is that teams seem to only want to do 80%, or they only want to do 3 out of 4 trials or 4 out of 5 trials, but they're measuring that over the course of a full year. Rather than 4 out of 5 trials per month. Or depending on what the topic is. A kid with dyslexia, they need to be decoding at 90% because they're already at 80%. They are not getting it. 80% is the standard.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I find most frustrating and really need to push teams on and help them think about, well, maybe we should be looking at these trials monthly. Maybe we should be looking at higher than 80%. And that's super, super important to consider.
And do you find that at the IEP meetings that you all do, the teams are, quick to water down the goals? Is that something that parents have to be on the lookout for, to keep the bar high?
Very much so. One of the things I noticed with the new IEP, I know we're not, most of us are not experts on it yet. It's kind of an evolving thing, but is that the goals there's a section in each goal area that's to add the Common Core state standards only for the academic goals, not for the functional goals, which I think in some ways is kind of brilliant because it really forces the team to be accountable to what a general ed student should be able to achieve if they didn't need services. And I don't know how many years I would be fighting for students who weren't necessarily, who were 2 or 3 years behind, and the districts were not aligning the goals with what all the other students were expected to do. So I think that can be helpful with really honing in on not only what the skill is that the student should be achieving in the academic area, but also making the team accountable for it. And as far as the 80% goes. It depends on the goal. For example,
Yes.
if you're trying to teach a student to walk across the street and look both ways, if they don't get it 10% of the time, then that's a problem, right?
Yes.
I think everybody's heard that scenario, but so it really depends on what the goal. I mean, I argue for specific skill sets in reading and math is the student should be able to achieve it 100% of the time, because if you can't add and subtract accurately, you're not going to be able to be successful in a math environment. But
those are such important components, Anne, and I'm so glad you brought them up. One of the things that I've really taken to saying in PPT meetings, and I hope that our parents watching will start saying it, is appropriately ambitious. That our goals and everything we do with our kids needs to be appropriately ambitious. Gone are the days where I'm going to sit there. Actually, I never really sat there and listened to this and stood by, but I would hear teams say, well, we're just looking at 1 year's progress. No, my kiddo's already a year, 2 years, 3 years behind, or has the nature of that child's disability is such that, you know, we have to really up the ante. We need to be appropriately ambitious. And that is definitely measured with those 80%, 90%, 100%, and thinking about how we write those SMART goals. So it's super important.
And the one thing I want to tie in here, because I don't think we've talked about, is the objectives. All of the objectives should be building off of each other. You should not have one thing that says you're going to add whole numbers, and then the next one is about utilizing bar graphs. It should be connected, building upon each other to reach that overarching goal. If you have different areas within English language arts, math, you know, whatever area of concern, then there needs to be a goal for each area. It's not, the objectives are not to combine it all together to make less goals.
And if we're talking about functional goals, I think it's, sorry, Laura.
Go ahead.
I think it's really important to always be thinking as the child will develop into an adult going forward, because I feel like, as you said, Jill, teams can often be focused on the very short term in just 1 year, and then they feel another team has the student, and if they can show progress during that 1 year, then they feel good. But I'm always trying to get everybody to think about the future. You know, where will this child be in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, and will they be independent? So especially for the functional goals, to always be thinking in terms of what will they need to achieve.
Did you just say especially social emotional goals?
Functional goals.
Oh, functional goals.
Yeah. Well, all that, which is, I think social emotional is now in that functional category.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, you know, should you be looking at social emotional goals with the same lens as what you've all been describing? Because I know sometimes those can be even harder to make it's hard to assess whether a social emotional goal is measurable, isn't it? And what would be a good example of a specific, measurable, appropriate social?
Sometimes you have to look at it from a behavioral data standpoint, and I don't always like to do that with the emotional stuff. I'm a social worker by trade, so my background is in clinical social worker, and I did that also in a school setting. But you have to look at what the behavioral outcome is of the work that's being done. So, for example, if your goal is about building coping strategies, then you're going to be taking data about the child utilizing the coping strategies that you were working on in the counseling session. Or if the goal is about problem solving with their peers, then you're going to be looking at a decrease of whatever behavior you were seeing that made you want to build that problem solving goal. You're going to be seeing a decrease over time. And so that's how you would write those objectives as well, so that everybody is really clear on, listen, me as social worker in the counseling group session, I'm going to be working on these 5 different coping skills. And I'm going to have someone in the classroom, and they're going to have just this little checkbox thing, because it's really easy. And they saw that XY, you know, Susie implemented her deep breathing. And that not only did she do that, but she said to her friend, I need a minute. I got to take a deep breath. You know, so those are the types of things, and we're going to have data sheets on it. They feel a lot more nebulous, and it is harder for teams to wrap their brains, I think, around how to do it. But if you dissect it, you can do it. You just have to kind of think a little deeper on it.
And,
You bring up an important point there, Jill, sorry to jump in, with regard to who's taking the data in that particular kind of setting, which is a different scenario than if you're talking about measuring the progress in decoding or in reading. That's measurable, as you look, through, the written work or the academic work or whatever. But a social and emotional goal, like you're talking about behavioral, is a little bit more, squishy, and like, who's taking that data? Is it the classroom teacher who has 27 other kids that they're like trying to manage at the same time? Or is there someone dedicated to taking that data for that specific child, or for, maybe a couple of specific children?
Yeah. And it's
And it-
super hard. And there's a lot of different ways to do it.
Yeah.
From the simplest form of having a teacher have something in one pocket that they put into the other pocket during the day when they notice X behavior. I as a school social worker, I actually gave a teacher once a whole big bin of paper clips. And I said, here, put these in your one pocket. And every time Susie does X, put it in this pocket, and let's find what it is at the end of the day. There's also, we have our paraeducators that are in many different classrooms, and we can train, and I do mean we need to train our paraeducators on what they're looking for and how to support the students. For older students, sometimes we'll have a self-monitoring checklist that we might check with the adult in the room to see if they truly were doing it. But I think the important takeaway on this is, if it's only being monitored in the setting with the social worker or the guidance counselor or the school psychologist that's doing it, then you have missed a huge aspect of what needs to happen, because there's a lot of kids who
Like
in
recess.
that counseling session, right, you'll notice they'll do X, Y, and Z, but in the moment of the classroom, they're not. And so I really struggle with these goals when we're only looking at in the session. Yes, they have to learn it there, but there has to be a generalization piece.
And the big thing that I think everyone is talking about here is data. There should be a baseline data, and you get your progress reports with your marking periods, and it's the data that's going to show you the progress and if the goals and objectives are appropriate. If you're not making appropriate progress, it's time to have a meeting to maybe relook at those goals and objectives to see, if you're breezing through and mastering so quickly, they're not rigorous enough. And if you're not making meaningful gains either, maybe they are too far of a reach. So that data is very important, and the collection of that data is crucial.
And even though the goals and objectives are written for technically a year's worth of time, it doesn't mean that you can't convene an IEP and adjust things as needed. As Dan is saying, it's right. If the student's really struggling and it's clear they're not achieving a goal, or something's got to change with that process. So.
And moving just onto some of the other sections of the IEP, we spoke so far a little bit about present levels and goals. What is some advice that you can offer for assessing other sections of the IEP? Are there certain sections that you feel parents need to be on the lookout for?
So
Red flags. Red flags. What's a red flag?
I was going to talk more about where parents have a lot of control and input. They have input and control over the whole thing, but where you can feel empowered, let's use that word. And that is there is a whole section just for parent and student input and concerns. And I work with my parents, and I have them draft a statement for the team at least 24 hours. We try to do, 3 days before the meeting, and send it to the team so they have time to review it and see it. And then we ask them to copy and paste that into the parent and student input section of the IEP. If it's long, then we say, can you attach it to the IEP in the student's record? Working, and Dani, working in a law office, I'm sure this is drilled in you. We are really looking at record keeping and making sure your record is perfect. So the parent input and student concerns, what I often ask parents to do for students is ask them, and this works for all ages, What do you think's working? What do you think is going well at school? What do you feel is helping you? What do you think that you need a little more help in? And then the biggest one that I get a lot of answers from students is what do you wish your teachers knew about you? And so I often have, and then parents can put in what their concerns are, what's going on at home. So that is one area that I think parents can feel most empowered, and that's your section. And then the other part would be meeting minutes, which in Connecticut, meeting minutes are optional. Meeting summary is optional. However, up until this point, I haven't found a district that doesn't fill at least 3 sentences in there, but I always review that with a fine-tooth comb. And I will always send edits to my parents to send to the school district to make sure they correct the record, because if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. And then the other part that parents need to be look at with a very fine-tooth comb is the prior written notice. Anytime a parent makes a request, or anytime something's proposed, it needs to be documented in the prior written notice. Sorry, I took a lot of space.
Well, and also if anything's been, if the district hasn't agreed to something that the parent has asked for, that should also be in prior written notice. And what their response to it is, what they're going to try instead. Because
if they're proposing a change, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right.
What I would also say is not to ignore, there's a lot of little boxes all over the IEP that you would check off here and there. And I would say not to ignore them. Go slow and read all that fine print. For instance, on the current IEP, there's the transition services page. And there's a box that says, this is either the first IEP to be in effect when the student turns 14, meaning our kiddo who's 13, if we're at their annual review and their 14th birthday is coming up, that page now needs to be filled out. You cannot wait till the next year because they'll already be 14. So looking at those little boxes and little things and making yourself familiar, and don't be scared to ask a question at the meeting.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in. Sorry, there's a question in the chat that I wanted to pose to the panel. What should parents watch out for in accommodations and modifications?
It's a loaded question.
Yeah. Thanks, Meredith.
Yeah, we love you, Meredith. So the new IEP is actually really interesting. I was looking at this the other day. One of the biggest questions I get from families is, what's the difference between an accommodation and a modification, right? So an accommodation is something, we're not changing the curriculum, we're just making it easier to access. A modification is a change. And in the new IEP, you have to put them under accommodations or modifications, whereas in the old IEP, they're all lumped together. So I think teachers actually get just as confused as the parents do. And certainly it is often a big discussion in PPT meetings regardless. But I think what's really super important for everyone to recognize with the accommodations and the modifications is that they are so important, and that you really need to read through them. And it shouldn't be modified worksheets. What the heck does that mean? So just like with the other aspects that we've been discussing, you need to ask for specifics. And I believe in the new format of the IEP, there's a lot more space for additional characters, so that it shouldn't be the argument of, well, we just have this drop-down menu, we can't put anything else in. And I'm sure most of you have sat in IEP meetings and heard that it's not on the drop-down. Well, there's supposedly a lot more space. So the biggest thing I can say is ask for the specifics. These are as important, sometimes more important, because they are all of the aspects that everyone in the school building must follow. I don't care if you're the PE teacher, if you're the cafeteria staff, you need to follow these items in order to support the student.
And that's a good point. You make a good point. Sorry, again, is pointing out, the depth in which, these boxes or these answers are filled out. I look at IEPs in a much different way than all of you do, but when I look at them and I and I skim them for the first time. This is actually embarrassing to say, but a lot of times what I look for in my first read is length. If something is short, it's like I'm like this. Not a lot of care was taken in this, whether or not it was a summary, the meeting summary, or a goal or whatever. Like I'm just skimming through them and looking to see like what is the length of something, how much did they care to write, and to write a summary or whatever. And so that's something that I kind of look at as a red flag, even though what I do is very, very different than what you do. That's just an aside.
So something very big to point out as well with the accommodations that Jill was referencing is this is going back to present levels of performance. When I look at the accommodations on every IEP I'm given, if there's time and a half, separate setting, the ability to give a oral defense, that should have a reflection in the present levels of performance in some way. That is able to produce, higher quiz grades when they are in a separate environment, something that tells me why is that accommodation one that is needed, because you absolutely don't want an accommodation on there that is not necessary. We want to create independence. So I would say that it should be illustrated in the present levels as well.
And also it's really important. I mean, we've fallen into this, or my teams have fallen into this trap where they've added a modification. And so the student appears to be doing exceedingly well. But when you really drill down on what that modification is, you find out that the student's only responsible for 1 out of 20 assignments during the course of the semester. And so if they've achieved that one assignment at an exceptional level, then they receive an A. And it often is a fluid process where teams are not necessarily held to task with exactly what that modification is. So as you say, Dani and Jill, it's really important that there are specifics of when it occurs and how much it's going to affect the student's workload. I also want to add that I was just cruising around through the State Department of Ed website. I'm sorry I didn't add the link in the chat, but they did publish a document of accommodations and modifications that was incredibly thorough. It's the most thorough one I've seen in a long time. It is by no means the only it does not hold the only options available. We can all be creative, but it is relatively exhaustive, and it breaks down the difference between the modifications and the accommodations. So I think for parents, it can be really helpful.
And I think there was a question out there on prior written notice that we wanted to go back to. And then there's also a question on, can we limit the number of goals, or can the number of goals be limited? But should we go back to prior written notice for a second?
Right. I noticed that on the chat. The question was just trying to understand prior written notice, what it is, and when is it to be offered. I think the big takeaway I want people to understand is prior written notice should happen at every single PPT meeting. Yes. Every single one. Actually, and this is not new, this has been happening for a while, but doesn't typically happen. No parent should ever leave a PPT meeting without being given a written version of prior written notice. That's supposed to happen at PPT meetings. I can tell you on one hand how often I've had that handed to me in a meeting. However, in the new IEP document, it will be something separate. And prior written notice, really, just to give you the snapshot of it, it's what we agreed to and what we disagreed to. And that has to be listed every single time. You need to leave the meeting knowing, what did we recommend? What did we agree? What did the district team say no to?
And I think what gets confusing is people hear prior written notice. Yeah. They're like, but the meeting happened. It's prior to the implementation. Okay. That's your prior written notice. Prior to implementation, here's your notice.
But after the meeting. So it's after the meeting, 10-day time frame. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is confusing. I used to get stuck on that.
I know, it confuses a lot of people.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely check over that to make sure that the district has added anything that you have either asked for and they have refused, or you've asked for and they have agreed to. That's really important, because I find a lot of times districts fail to include in that prior written notice the things that they disagreed with and did not agree to. And to provide. So
yeah, often it says implement IEP, and that's all you've got. When
Right.
you know you asked for an additional speech session or you asked for some counseling.
That's what I mean about
goals.
it being short, the brevity.
Right, right.
Yeah,
So-
so feel
So
free
when
to
one
write
doesn't,
back and
what does one
say,
do when you don't agree with the prior written notice? Then what does one do?
email back and say, please reflect this in prior written notice. And my colleague says all the time, email, the E stands for evidence. You have asked for it to be put into prior written notice. If they don't do it, that's a different step that you could take down a line. Not going to go down that rabbit hole, but step one, ask for it to be changed.
And anytime you email something like that, you should also ask that the email be attached to your child's academic file. I can't tell you how many times we've had clients come to our office and say, I asked for this in a PPT, and I say, I'm looking at your IEP, it's not there. If it's not written, it didn't happen.
And just because I want to cover all the areas of the IEP, well, there was that question on, is there a limit to how many goals an IEP can
No,
have? Is there a limit? I know
how's that for an
sometimes teams
answer?
will say it's
No.
already 20
No.
pages.
no,
Okay.
there's not a limit.
But at the same
Right.
time, it's important to prioritize what really is critical for that student at that time. So
Yep.
if
Okay.
you have 25 goals, it's, unlikely
lot.
that the student will be able to
Remember,
access them.
But
Capable.
sometimes you have those 25 goals because that student has a special education teacher, a teacher of the hearing impaired, a speech and language pathologist, an OT, a PT, counseling, so sometimes that's the reason why there's that many goals. But
it's about achievable. What is achievable for that duration
Exactly.
of the IEP?
That's what has to be thought about. So if you have goals that the child won't have any time during the 7 hours, if that's what's decided is the time frame for the child, then it's not reasonable at that point. So it's important to figure out what is the most important thing at that time for that child to be able to progress.
And another important section of the IEP would be the service grid, where the actual, program and services is recommended. What should we be looking out for as parents when we look at our child's service grid?
So as we said, you start with the present levels. The present levels dictate the goals, and then the goals dictate the services. And so the service grid will tell you exactly which goals they're going to work on, who's going to work on it, who's responsible for it, who is implementing it, and where. Is it pull out into the resource room? Is it pushed into the classroom? Is it in a contained classroom? And for the duration and frequency of time.
It's funny because the first thing I do when I get an IEP is I actually go to the service grid and count the goals.
Me too.
Because you wouldn't believe how many times goals are just it could have been clerical or not, but it's not tied to a service. So if I have 10 goals in the IEP, I'm sitting there going 1, 2, 3, 4. And if I'm missing one, I'm asking who is addressing this?
One thing that I noticed with the new IEP, not that we're really focusing as much on it as during this session, but I couldn't find, and maybe somebody else could, in that new service delivery grid, I could not find a designation for individual or group. Did anybody see an area for that?
I thought I did see
I
that.
thought I did. I thought I did, Anne.
Can we just
saw
talk
that.
brief? I guess we did mention we're not talking that much about the new IEP, but
Yes.
can we just give a little background that there is a new Connecticut IEP, and what is kind of the current what are you seeing? Is it out there? Do parents need to know about it? What can they do to get ready for it?
I haven't even seen
And
any.
it is there. I just looked it up. It is there.
It is there. Okay, good. So that's another fact point for parents, is that, it's important that it's designated in that service delivery grid, whether it's an individual one-on-one or whether it's in a small group setting, because if you've discussed at the PPT that the child really can't learn decoding skills in a small group setting because their needs are so specific, then it's really important to make sure it's reflected in the service delivery grid.
And ask them to define small group. How many?
Right.
And
Always.
I'll ask them to define that and put it on the meeting minutes, put it on the record.
Mm-hmm.
I think regardless of which system is being used, it's the content that matters. It doesn't matter if it's CT SEDS or IEP Direct. It's the content and everything that's written in it that is the most important. The format is the format.
There's been a lot of confusion, I think, at the district and the state level, frankly, on when do you use what. Originally, districts were sharing with myself and my clients that as of July 1st, they no longer had access to the IEP Direct Frontline system, which is what we're all accustomed to being on the IEP. And then over the summer, little by little, I was getting IEPs from meetings I had on that old form, right, that they supposedly couldn't use anymore. And then recently, very recently, one of the districts shared with one of my families who forwarded on to me that the new format is required right off the bat on new referrals, annuals, and triennials, but that the old format will be used for any amendments or review revise meetings and whatnot. So I was trying to drill that down on the SDE website because, guys, this is new for all of us too.
Yeah.
So we're learning it right alongside with you. And so I was trying to drill that down on the SDE website, State Department of Ed website. I couldn't find it. So I don't know if others were able to find that, but that's the best clarification I've gotten. So that means that districts still do have access to the old format, even though many of you may have heard from them that they don't. So the only thing I have gotten in the new format was over the summer from one district. I got it twice from one district, the prior written notice page and the recommendations page. Because again, those are separate from the IEP now, which is one thing about the new document I do not like. I wish it was all together because now you have to go looking for those things, and that frustrates me. But those are the only pages I've seen twice from the same exact district. I don't know about others, if they've been seeing it or what information you've been receiving either from the state or from the districts as to when they're supposed to use what.
I have a few teachers that are friends of mine, and they said that for their new students this year, they're instructed to use the new format.
For new students, but not for recurring
students. Yeah.
students.
Not yet. No, these are for new. Yeah.
Yeah. So my point is that there's confusion at the state level, there's confusion at the district level. And so in some ways, as advocates, as parents, you're all advocates, right? As a parent, you need to ask, which way are you doing it, my district? And let's roll with that, and let's make sure that we all understand that.
And Dani, did you want to speak to, or I think someone, I'm just looking in the chat, someone asked when is, or the question and answers, when is the new IEP supposed to come out for viewing for parents?
So that is still, I know that I have a few clients that I work with that they've been in the portal. The only thing they've been able to see so far is an invitation. Okay. But that could be simply because the IEP is not input into that system. I think it's going to be a slow rollout.
Okay.
And we're all in the same seat right now.
Okay. Dani, can you explain what that is, the parent portal versus what we're used to?
So you have to think of it. I don't even have a good example of what to compare it to. There's going to be a parent portal version. Oh, PowerSchool. That's a good example. So when you log into PowerSchool, you're able to see your kids' classes that have been published, their grades, their homeworks, etc. So the IEP CT says is going to be similar. You're going to log in. You'll be able to see your invitations, your prior written notice, any evaluations that get uploaded into the system, and the IEP once it's finalized. I am not sure how it works when it's still in draft mode. I don't think that's going to be published over, but you'll have your own access to see everything in this one hub to be able to download it, print it off for yourself. It's all going to be through that, as well as your progress report. So instead of that getting sent every marking period, you'll have to just, I guess, get a notification. You log in and you can see the progress reports.
The other thing I wanted to mention about the new system, and again, we're learning this all together, guys, right? Is that, oh, and I just lost my train of thought on that. Oh, no, I remembered it. Sorry. Because we're having to log in, I don't know about you all, but I'm not the best tech savvy person in the world. This is not my strength, my friends. And we're all going to have to learn a new technology system that is going to require us to log in. And another thing that I haven't gotten full clarity on is what documents and what aspects will be available to the parent to see versus what the school team is able to see. And so I'm a little bit concerned about what that is. I did watch a few webinars that the State Department of Ed put out on some of the different sections that were teacher trainings. And it was clear to me that there's a ton of information that's going to be on the back end of this. I'm just not sure how much of it is going to be viewable to the parents in terms of notes and the progress monitoring data and all of those other aspects that I do think as a parent, it can be overwhelming, but for some parents, it's also incredibly helpful. So I think that's an important piece to keep in our minds. We're all learning and we're not quite sure what's going to be seen.
And Dani, you mentioned the draft IEP. I think one of the things that you wanted to touch on, Lara, was if you could request a draft of the IEP, and if it's not in that portal, then I would recommend just asking for it.
Ask it, yeah.
As an attachment or in paper form.
Can you always ask for? Can you always ask for a draft of the IEP?
You can. Some districts are not necessarily comfortable doing that because they use the argument that the IEP should be created
at the meeting.
At the meeting to have everybody's input. But we just reinforce the idea that it accelerates the process in the meeting because the parent has had an ability to review what the recommendations are, and it's by no means the final draft at all, that it can be adjusted, but at least they've had some exposure to what the team is thinking about. And it also forces the team, I think, to think ahead rather than trying to create things at the last minute in that meeting. And it's just too hard to process.
And on the flip side, the team, the PPT may also like to see documents beforehand from the parents, correct? So,
absolutely.
And
sharing documents ahead of
reports. Right. So what might some of those reports be that parents would want to share with the team before?
I would think any private evaluations that you were going to share with the school, that's your choice whether you want to or not. The team is going to want those ahead of time. Like you would want those ahead of time. So, I always target for 3 days to give everybody enough time to review them. It doesn't always happen. We have to be flexible, but it's good practice. So everybody can be well aware of what the information is beforehand.
At bare minimum, if it's an annual PPT or anything, as long as it's not a triennial, you can ask for draft goals that they're thinking of proposing. That they should have prepared, ready to go, and you can look at those over and ask your questions at the team meeting.
And Stacey, I asked for them with a triennial too, because a lot of our students, the triennial is not necessarily to reach term and eligibility. It's also to determine present levels. So I just think that's an important piece too, that a lot of times teams will say, oh, well, we're redetermining eligibility. And while there are instances where that is the case, where there is a question on, is this child still going to qualify? I think it's more likely than not that we all already kind of know we still are going to qualify this kid, and this child is not going to stop qualifying. So I always ask for them then too.
Before any meeting, any document that's going to be shared at the PPT, you should have a chance to review it beforehand. So that way you can be familiar, formulate your questions and ask them and have a meaningful participation within the PPT. And part of that is reading the old IEP. Read your old IEP, be familiar with what the goals and objectives and what the present levels were then. So when you go into the annual or triennial PPT, you are, okay, you're telling me that we need to work on this, but wait a minute, that was on the old IEP, so we didn't master that. Let's discuss this. Why? Be familiar.
And to the point of draft goals, a situation where it might not be the best practice is when you're reviewing outside evaluations or IEEs, things like that, because it's new information for everybody. And so the first discussion is actually at that PPT.
Well, again, though, if the evaluation has been provided to the team well in advance of the meeting, and for an outside evaluation, such as an IEE, typically at least a week before the meeting, typically, not always, but typically at least a week before the meeting, there might be relevant draft goals. So regardless, I think it's a really good course of habit to get into as a parent, to request any documentation that's going to be shared at the meeting, be it data that we're going to be reviewing, progress monitoring information, and a written update from the classroom teacher that everybody else except for the parent might have in front of them. And I think that's the other comment that I will often share back with teams when they say, well, we're going to develop it at the meeting. And I say, absolutely, we're going to develop it at the meeting. But won't all of your school-based people have a document that says draft in front of them with notes that they've already inputted? And they'll look at me and be like, what? Like, yeah, y'all have it in front of you, you know, so if you do, then we should too, because then I'm not a full participant. My parent's not a full participant in the meeting. And that's the thing we need to remember, guys, is you are the most important
person in the room.
You're part of the
expert
team.
on the child.
You're the team.
And on that point, if we get the IEP as the parent and we think something is missing, or we don't agree with something, or we have questions, can the IEP be edited, or is it final at that point?
No, definitely email those concerns over. Depending on the type of concern that you had, it can be through what's called an amendment, where they can do it without a meeting. But if it's something larger, it's going to be a meeting to rediscuss that topic, so it's reflected appropriately on the IEP. But you should, as always, email your concern, put it in an email. And I'm going to say this out loud. If you're in a PPT meeting, record the meeting.
Yes,
a lot of information. People are talking in what seems another language to you. Record the meeting.
You need to tell the team you are recording, correct?
Absolutely.
I'm going to be recording today, and that's your right to record so you can participate meaningfully. And you have something to reflect back on. I know that, you know, I record all meetings I go to. I need to listen to it again. Did I hear that right? Maybe I remembered incorrectly. Record the meeting. And especially, you know, if you get yourself in a situation down the line, you have all of your recordings that you can reflect back on, rather than, well, I said, and then they said. You have the recording.
And I always ask parents to take notes, and I take notes as well.
Yep.
And we compare to make sure that we've actually heard the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I use a fantastic system called Otter, which records an audio and spits out a transcript at the same time. So I don't have to worry about taking notes. There are definitely typos, but it helps tremendously, and you absolutely should have, you should absolutely record. And yes, you should give them notice. It's in every single one of our parent input letters as we're preparing for the PPT. By the way, I'll be recording. So, and it's no big deal. I think a lot of parents get afraid that they think it's adversarial or awkward, or the team is going to be uncomfortable. I have never found a team that finds it uncomfortable. People usually just forget that it's recording, especially now in virtual PPT days. So,
can you put that into the chat? The Otter, yeah.
There was a question I just want to quickly answer live, asking about the timeline of the team has 5 days to get the IEP out to you. You do have 5 days to review it, and that's usually what I try to do it within that time. But folks, please understand that if you aren't able to review it within 5 days, whenever you review it, please get it back to your team. The issue you need to remember is that 15 days from the date of your PPT meeting is when that IEP gets implemented. So if you have a disagreement, and my friends who work for the attorneys on here will attest to this, probably more feverishly than I will, but you need to implement your due process rights, be it for filing a due process or asking for mediation, in order to stop the implementation. If your intent is to stop the implementation of something, you need to talk to one of the attorneys pretty quickly to get that started. However, if your intention is more to, and your hope is more to, let's amend it, let's talk through this, let's figure this out, which is typically what happens when we try to share what we feel might be wrong or miscaptured, just understand that that IEP will be implemented regardless within 15 days. So.
Correct.
And then I know it is almost, or it's a little past 8 o'clock. Are there any other areas of the IEP? Like I know from my days of working in New York City, a very important logistical part of the IEP was always the special education transportation box. Are there certain little last minute tips you can
My-
leave the parents
my
with if there's
favorite-
one little thing?
My favorite is when they talk about assistive technology like Bookshare or books on audio, but then they'll mark that assistive technology is not
Not
required.
necessary.
But it is
Right.
required because you just
That's my
they need
thing.
Lexia
Yes.
or Bookshare. So you want to make
Be
sure.
on the lookout for the assistive tech box.
Yes,
Yeah,
make
well,
sure
it's different in the new IEP, but that's my biggest pet peeve. I go through there, I'm like, wait a minute, let's look at the accommodations page and let's look at the assistive technology box, and it's not checked off,
checked off.
and we haven't talked about it, and nobody brought it up. It's like, ooh. But yeah, I'm right with you, Dani, on that. I find that with the new IEP, there's some more clarity, as you said, Lara, with transportation. It's really clear. Teams now have to think about whether there are any extenuating circumstances with transportation, and whether there needs to be additional resources regarding the transportation process.
I will say, I will say
adaptive equipment or something. Yeah.
specific to the transportation piece, and this will not apply to many
It's
of our
probably a whole
families.
other panel, right?
Right. But if your child has door-to-door transportation, make sure you really define that.
Yes.
Because door-to-door could mean the end of the driveway.
The
That
end of
is
the
a big
street.
steep.
Mhm.
Or it could be at the garage door. It could be the end of the street. So just think about what that transportation means. Is there an adult that needs to be on the bus with the child? So that has to be drilled down better. And in the old IEP, you would get a printed copy where you couldn't see what all those words were that was after it. I'm hoping that's remedied in this new IEP.
I always
I
use
wanted
the
to add
example-
another. Go
Oh,
ahead.
I'm so sorry. I always use the example that if you were to take your IEP and move to Kentucky tomorrow,
Yes.
that team has zero question about any aspect of what your child needs. So you want to make sure everything is crystal clear. So when you move to Minnesota, that teacher has no question about what your child gets.
And one more area that I was very happy to see is for transition services. I know we talked about that briefly earlier, and it kind of often just gets swept under the rug and not really articulated well or defined. But there is a section for transition services that's much more robust, and it includes what kind of assessments have been done for the transition process. So I think it's really forcing teams to think about what information do we need to support the student in those three main areas of transition. So it's defined at a higher level. ESY services has its own service delivery grid,
Mhm.
which helps me. I know I get confused by all those little teeny weeny dates and those little teeny weeny boxes and what's happening when. So that can be helpful. And one last thought was, before we finish a meeting, I always want to reiterate with the team what they are putting in the PPT recommendations,
yeah.
those bullet points, to make sure that they have addressed all those areas of recommendations that we've discussed and that they've agreed to.
Thank you so much, everybody. And I guess, just a reminder to the parents that they can ask any questions at the IEP meeting. You should, like we always stress here, you're the most important member of the team. So an IEP is a very confusing document. It's like we've all been looking at IEPs for 20 plus years, and we probably each see something. I learned a bunch of new things tonight just listening to each of you. I think I was always confused by the prior written notice as well. So the parents should always feel free to ask these types of questions about, what certain things mean on the IEP at the meetings. But if anyone has any last words they want to
Thank
share,
you so
otherwise,
much.
I think
Thank you so much
thank
for
you very
joining
much.
us. Thank you all to all of our panelists, Jill, Dani, Stacey, Ann, and to our moderator, Lara. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I neglected to mention at the start that our next webinar is going to be September 28th. Also a Wednesday night, also at 7 p.m. The topic at that meeting will be, what is an IEE? Very, very important.
Good
So
one.
please join us for that. You can sign up the same way you did for this, but thank you all so much for
And
joining
will
us.
this meeting will be recorded for
This
people.
meeting will be recorded and provided to everyone that attended the meeting, people that weren't able to make the meeting, also on Facebook and our website, just as soon as I get around to it. So have a great night, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.